Nestled about 15 miles east of Harrisburg in central PA, you can find the village of Campbelltown, a place where families and community members call home. Follow along with us as we share with you the voices of longtime Campbelltown residents, historians, and community members looking back into the past of Campbelltown.
I'm Esther Lina Weaver-Jenks, and I'll be 85 next month.
My name is Pat Brandt, and my age is 87.
My name is Dottie Brandt Black, and I'm 84 years old.
My name is Rich Brandt. I'm 87.
Established in 1760 by Scotch-Irish settlers, Campbelltown was a place that gave people an opportunity to grow their businesses and families. Unlike Palmyra, Annville, and Lebanon City, Campbelltown had large portions of land that were given to various people, mostly farmers, and over time Campbelltown transformed into the community it is today.
From what we know, it was founded in 1759. John Campbell, that's a very common name of a Scots-Irish background, so it was really hard to even find where was his house. When he passed away, where was he buried? I was unable to locate either one of those two things. We do know that when he passed away, there was no will, so he died intestate is the word they use. His wife, at that time, in that era, women weren't technically allowed to own property. So it had to go to a male heir. So it actually went to his only brother they could find in Cumberland County by the name of Patrick. And Patrick only had it for a brief period of time, and then it passed through some other folks, and it eventually ended up with a family by the name of Wolfersberger. With John Campbell, they used the year 1759 because that's when he got the patent for a 352 and 102 acre tract. And Campbelltown, the center of town, is through the center of where that 352 acre tract was. When you read some of the early deeds, it says that there was a town formed by him. In my opinion, from what I could tell, it was mostly farms or pieces of property that he rented out to others.
The village location brought success as it became a station between Harrisburg and Philadelphia. A turnpike was constructed and referred to locally as the Horseshoe Pike. Along this route, local businesses began to grow and flourish. One of the shops servicing the villagers was Brandt's Hardware, which was located on the north side of West Main Street. This operation started in 1868. Initially, the building was used as a tailor shop and a stove and tin shop. In addition to providing goods for the community, this was also a gathering place for residents and a wealth of memories for the Brandt family.
The hardware store our house was attached right to the hardware. And they did sell. And it wasn't always real neat, but all the boys, they knew where everything was in that store that they sold. And it was a big part of the community because of the farmers bought their things there and the town people. Of course, that changed as the years went by.
I grew up in the hardware store until my teenage years. Matter of fact, in court, they asked me where I was born, and I said I was born in a hardware store.
Along with the hardware shop, other businesses started to develop. From the town tavern to the Campbelltown Creamery to the Miller and Son Harness Shop and the Robert Kane String Shop, Campbelltown began to grow and flourish during the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
There was a carriage works in town, if you know where the Country String Shop is, which is the firehouse, the old firehouse. And they manufactured carriages, wagons, that type of stuff. Probably by the 1860s, 70s was a harness shop. And I don't know if Rich Brandt talked about Miller's Harness Shop or not, but a lot of kids who had baseballs that were coming apart, Mr. Miller, I understand from what I was told, used to sew them and do that type of stuff. But that was the original harness shop in the community. So, and that dated somewhere 1860s, 1870s. There was a tavern in town that goes back I don't know if it goes back to the late 1700s, but it's pretty close. And that originally stood where the United Methodist Church is now. The United Methodist Church actually bought the property with the tavern building still on it in the 1920s, and they used the tavern building for church services until they could get enough money to build a physical church.
One of the popular places in Campbelltown was the Rising Sun. The Rising Sun used to be a motel until it was recently removed in 2016. It then was closed for renovations after being bought by the Funk family, and it opened again in 2018. The original sign that was removed during World War II was kept and refurbished. Over its lifetime, the Rising Sun has been a farmhouse, bar, and classic eatery. Campbelltown acquired its own 195-yard plot of land to begin construction of its first ever school in 1845. Quickly after, a schoolhouse was constructed, but replaced with a 2-story brick building located on the northwest corner of Center and Main Streets. Due to the town's growing population, the board decided to begin construction on a plot purchased from popular business owners Frank R. Dissinger and John T. Lesher. The building contained 4 spacious rooms. There were 2 classrooms on the first floor, 1 on the second, and the 4th room served as the boardroom. When the number of students later increased in the 1930s, the boardroom was converted into a 4th classroom.
When the free school law was enacted in 1834, that allowed then for government funds to be used to pay for schools. Before that, they were normally, from my understanding, run by the churches in the community. And so individuals who wanted to get any type of schooling either learn from their parents, if they were able to read and write, or go to the local churches to be able to pick up on that stuff as well.
In 1936, the South Londonderry School District began consolidating the number of schools in the area. This led to the students from the one-room schools of Haldeman and Chestnut Hill to begin attending the Campbelltown School. A new school building at Lawn and the Campbelltown School became 2 main schoolhouses of South Londonderry Township.
Once they were able to consolidate everything, that was after they added the wing to this building in 1936. They brought the rest of the one-room schools all into Campbelltown then.
I went to that school. They didn't have kindergarten at that school, but I went there from 1st grade to 8th grade. It was really neat because we had a music teacher that would come, and we would put on operettas. And we would go down to the fire hall and put on, and then people from town would come to watch it. And May Day, we had a maypole, and we would do that. It was just like one family at that school.
Usually, well, the school in this community went to 8th grade, that was it. So you either had to find your way to Palmyra, or a lot of kids would take the trolley and go to Hershey, and then they would graduate from there.
I attended the Campbelltown School till 8th grade, and then I went to Hershey. That was the time we could still go to Hershey. And we went on the trolley, but then after a while, they took the trolleys off, and then we went on Bucks's bus.
The Palmyra Area School District decided to close the doors of the Campbelltown School at the start of the 1971-72 school year. This building and its surrounding property was given to the South Londonderry Township to be used as the municipal building. For Pat Brandt, teaching in the Palmyra School District was not only a career, but a way of life.
Well, I wanted the 5th grade. So the superintendent at that time was Robert Hartz. A friend of my mother's was teaching at Palmyra, and she talked to Mr. Hartz, and Mr. Hartz called me, and this is the way I got my job. And so that's the way it was at that time. He said, we can give you 3rd grade if you will take 3rd grade, but we will have another 5th grade next year because of the population. The population, the whole time I've been in that school district, grew. And so I had 3rd grade. Now at that time, the school was where Interfaith Manor is in Palmyra. The school was there, and I was up on the 3rd floor in this little room, and then the next year I had the 5th grade, and that was down in the basement.
In 1903, even before the construction of the Hershey Chocolate Factory, Milton Hershey sponsored the creation of the Hummelstown and Campbelltown Street Railway Company, a trolley system that would connect Dairy Church and Campbelltown. By the time the factory was built in June 1905, trolley service was established between Dairy Church, Hummelstown, and Palmyra. The fare per trip was quite affordable at 5 cents, giving people of Campbelltown a convenient and cheap way to get to the many attractions of Hershey.
When you talk about Campbelltown, that was a main core before Palmyra even existed. It was a hub, and it was such a strong hub that the only thing that ever changed it was the railroad came through and went to Palmyra instead of Campbelltown, and then that grew faster than Campbelltown. Well, the railroad, it was a communications for freight and stuff.
The lines to Hummelstown and Palmyra were finished by 1905. 3 years later, the line from Dairy Township to Campbelltown was up and running. For the majority of people, the trolley system was their main source of transportation. The trolley company transported people to and from Hummelstown, Palmyra, Elizabethtown, Campbelltown, and Lebanon. Unfortunately, automobiles started developing, which meant the usage of the trolley started to decrease. The last trolley ride to Campbelltown was in 1946. In 1941, the Old Barn and Rifle Club came to be in the community building and old fire hall. The purpose of the group was to promote sportsmanship, fellowship, fire safety principles, and gun knowledge. After the club collectively decided they needed a more permanent space, they rented Aaron Gingrich's barn and an indoor rifle space. The barn stood where the Turkey Hill stands today. Just a few months later, Alan Bucks offered the club to use Mr. Bucks's farm as an outdoor rifle range. Sadly, many of the members were drafted into World War II. This allowed a semi-monthly newsletter that was sponsored by the club to be sent free of charge to all who were serving from the South London Dairy District. The editor of the newsletters, Marlon W. Dissinger, then began to organize those that were interested in an empty bedroom above the hardware store. The first issue of the Old Barn and Rifle Club newsletters were produced in 1943. It included sports updates, church notes, news from the home, poems, and letters to the editor.
As well as the Barn and Rifle Club, which Mr. Dissinger was a part of that. But anyway, they, along with some other folks, actually got together and produced these newsletters. I think it started in 1943, I believe is the year. And they lasted until after the war. And basically what it was, they were bi-monthly newsletters sponsored by the Old Barn, they called it. And basically it was all about community life. They're awesome to read if you want to learn what the community was doing at that time period. That was a very interesting and wonderful community support mechanism for those who were in the service.
Mary Page Jerk, her husband went in the service, and the people that were in charge of the Old Barn and Rifle Club, they all got together. They decided, I don't know who decided, but there was a decision made, and that they were going to have this newsletter. And her house was next door to the fire hall, the original fire hall. And so she decided that they were going to, or not, she didn't decide, but these people got together and they organized, and you know, they had an editor, and they went all down through. They were very well organized, and the Girl Scouts met at the fire hall. And then at night, after, when we were walking home, we'd walk past her and we'd go in and we'd help, like when they had them all ready and to collate them and staple them together and everything. we'd stop and we'd help her. We'd just stop in there.
The group became bigger and busier, so a better space overall was needed. The home next to Bob Kane's Music Academy became the permanent space for the production staff. As the war was coming to an end during 1946, the group strived to produce the newsletters until every single person returned home. Although it was a huge part of how the town stayed connected to those serving during the war, it was time to close up shop.
They were sent to the men in the service, and they'd have little clips in about what happened in town. If somebody had the measles, they had that in. And they always had something, one of the ministers, and sometimes there were several articles in, but one of the ministers in town would have an article. There would be a biography of one of the servicemen's life, and there would be notes from the servicemen too that they had written. Oh, there would always be hockey news. If you can't do anything without hockey news. After the war, they had 2 copies that were memorial copies that they had made, but they also bound the books, and it made 2 volumes about that thick. They're very interesting. They really are, and they give you a good history of Campbelltown. So one time I went to a sale with my mother out the road here, and she went because she was interested in getting salt and pepper shakers. She knew that lady had a collection and she wanted to get some. So these books came up for sale, and I said, oh, I'd really like those. She said, well, bid on them. I said, well, I never bid. I don't know how to do it. Yes, she said, you do that. I'll help you. And I bid. And then somebody bid against me. And, then I thought, oh, no, I can't do this. And she said, now go on. I bid higher. And I did. And I got them for $10.
The Second World War changed family life in many ways. Richard Brandt remembers what it was like in Campbelltown during this time.
And I'll never forget it. When we had air raid sirens going with a kind of enemies coming, because they had shores with the submarines landing in the beach. And they also had, believe it or not, a lot of sympathizers that were German descent sided with Hitler. And they were sabotaging. And when those air raids took place, we lived was the house attached to the hardware. And in between there was a window, originally, and then they joined the two together, and that was considered the dark room. And all the people would come, bring their kids there in that room, and then our parents, the men were beyond on the streets, civil defense, air raid things. Like even some of these people from this town actually subdued saboteurs up at Harrisburg at the railroad. At the same token, our mothers all went to the fire hall to fold for bandages for people. And I tell you, it's hard to understand when those sirens would go when you're in your teens, and so forth. Young teens and before. But here again, it gives you shrills. But yet you accepted it, and you didn't think of what you don't have, just what you did have.
Church has always held an important role in the village of Campbelltown. In the beginning days of the town, the majority of the people were of the Presbyterian faith. The Scots-Irish families attended a service in Derry Township, and the Germans attended a service that was held multiple miles from town. To solve the problem, the joint church, Lutheran and Reform, was established. The Salem United Church of Christ was first constructed out of logs on land donated from the Wolfersberger family. They were one of the earliest German families to settle in Campbelltown, and the church was thought to be initially built in the late 1700s.
We don't know for sure because of a storm that happened in the 1890s, but we're pretty sure the congregation was started in the 1790s. So that would have been founded by German settlers in the area that were both Lutheran and German Reformed. Both of those congregations would have been worshiping here at the same time, served by two different pastors, but in the same building. And they both would have had German worship services here mixed in with English. A lot of the records that we do have that are left over were in English, so we know that that was predominant here, but the worship services would have often included, if not solely, been in German. So this is the congregation has existed since then, so we think it's about 230 years old. But this is the third building on the site. The first one was a log structure that supposedly the logs are used somewhere else in another house that still exists here in Campbelltown that we don't know one. That's one story I heard along the way. But then they built a stronger structure here that unfortunately a storm in 1896 toppled the steeple in upon the sanctuary, and that's when we lost some of the records, those kinds of things, and the building was destroyed. And then this present stone structure that we're in has existed since 1897 is when they dedicated it. They laid the cornerstone when building it in 1896.
Young boys and girls of Campbelltown went to service at least once a week and learned things that they still remember today.
We've had Sunday school here since 1846 is when the Sunday school began. So yeah, it's an incredible history of where you have these older folks that become mentors and inspiration to the children and youth that grow up here. And they see what it means to live out a life of faith, a life as a good community member, as a volunteer. They see our folks volunteering at things like the Caring Cupboard and the library and the Hershey Medical Center, and they go, well, that's a big part of what I should be doing in terms of my faith here too. So I think the children see that. I know my son saw that growing up here, and when he comes back here now from college, he makes sure he checks in with certain people that were important to him. So that intergenerational church feel, you cannot or underestimate that. Yeah, I would probably say in Campbelltown, because of how long this particular building and congregation has been here, probably back when the town was only 500 people, it was maybe even more of a central focus point than it is now, before everybody on the move and having everybody owning their own car and that kind of thing. This would have been the center part of town, along with the Little United Christian Church in the center of town. Those were the two churches, and eventually the Methodist Church that formed. It was a community center. When you see pictures of Sunday school and youth classes back from the early 1900s like we have, it's just incredible the amount of youth that were here.
The church was really, of course, before the fire department, the church was the only other social place that people could meet. That was the community center for a period of time as well. And it continued even after the fire company was formed, of course. I mean, that's where everybody went, everybody knew everybody. So the church is the ones that stepped up, and the fire department too. But
Church, we had to go every Sunday. We went to Salem. Okay. And my dad took the offering until his shoes squeaked and somebody laughed at him, so then he wouldn't do that anymore. But he still came to church. We all had to go to church. And Sunday school. Dottie's mother was my Sunday, and Rich's mother was my Sunday school teacher, Rhoda. And we learned. She taught us very well.
When you're a church, you have to be a part of the community, and we're intertwined with the history of that here since we've been here so long. And so you can't separate out our history from the town's history. And so that's been a fascinating thing for me to learn as the pastor in my time here, and to learn from the members themselves and their histories, like you're starting to record and to uphold. It becomes a part of the fabric of the congregation, because these are the people that are living every day in the lives, as well as attending church here.
On July 1st, 1925, citizens of Campbelltown met to discuss forming a fire department. Before there was talk of the fire department, the only fire protection was a small nearby creek and the townspeople with buckets. Because of the many concerns, they decided something needed to be done. Later that year, the Campbelltown Volunteer Fire Company was official. In 1927, Mr. Miller and Mr. Grubb offered land on Main Street to build a garage to house the fire hose. An electric siren was also added to the Miller and Grubb garage that year. The consensus of the town was that the fire company needed a permanent home. A plot of land was purchased and the fire hall and community center was completed in 1930. The three-story building housed a stage where the PTA would perform plays, a barber shop owned by George Bordelme, the fire truck room, and a kitchen and dining area in the basement.
Back those days, when I was in my 20s, your fire company was the government in a sense, or replaced the government. It was the absence of a mayor or anything like that. And the fire company actually set the tone of the town. And Dr. Risser's son, Harold Risser, who became a senator, he was the first president of the fire company. Very well done. They felt very community-minded. When that was built, a lot of people don't know this, but that fire hall up there was designed several ways. And it had at that time, one engine. And number two, if you looked at the front of that building, where the barber was, and then they had the middle doors into the auditorium, and then you had the truck. That building was built so you could have the barber shop become another place for a vehicle, and the middle part was going to be for another. 2 deep, all the way back to the stage.
A new fire station was completed in 1969. During that time, the 1930 building continued to be used by the barbershop, Boy and Girl Scouts, Fire Company, and the South Londonderry Township J.C.'s. The 1930 building was eventually sold in 1975.
The fire hall was where the music academy is now. And that's where they had the school operettas and school plays. And the barber shop was in the one room right in the building. George Bordelme had a barber shop there, and most of the local people went there to get their hair cut. But when the fire siren went, he would leave because it was all volunteer. And as soon as the fire siren would go, all the men would just go from wherever they were in town. Yeah, they often say about, like, if he was shaving somebody and half his face was shaved, too bad, off he went.
The carnivals were held once a year in Campbelltown as a fundraiser for the fire company. Some of the activities included bingo, ball pitch, sport wheel, and toy wheel. For several years, the biggest prize was a car. Many members of the town have positive memories of the carnivals and look back on them often. It was a great source of entertainment for the community and allowed neighbors to get to know each other.
When they had their carnivals, when the fire company had their carnivals, I worked there first as a Girl Scout. They had a Girl Scout stand, and then I went up and helped with the food stand. And I worked there until after I was married at the food stand, many years after I was married.
It's like I said, well, in the morning we got up, we ate breakfast, we were put out to pasture, and we got home for lunch and went out again. And we all played together, and one of our favorite spots, especially in the summertime, was down on the carnival grounds. There was no band shell. So they had stumps, and they had 4 sections where they put, which was the platform for the music, whatever music they had. And all the stands were wooden stands that they put up just at carnival time. That building wasn't there. And so we spent a lot of time down there. We went when the carnival was, and when we were in Scouts, we had a stand, and so we all took turns, tending to this stand. But they had bingo. They had a stand that they put up for bingo. Then they had the wheels, and they had the refreshments.
Today, approximately 4,000 people make the village of Campbelltown their home. Campbelltown was, and still is, a place of family, friendships, and community. A place where neighbors know each other and work together to build the future. The voices we heard today take us into the past, but remind us all how important the village of Campbelltown is today.
Yes.
Everybody knew each
You
other.
couldn't do anything that your mother wouldn't know because somebody would call her up, oh, Esther's down here, you know, and oh, yeah, you know, so they were always in touch. Oh, yeah.
We were all over. Sometimes we would go up to the other end of town to my cousins and play, and not really any particular spot right around our area, but we were outside playing all the time, even in the winter.
The point here is that you still have your heart where you were born. And there was always stories saying you can't go back to where you came from. That's not true. Physically, maybe, but mentally, you don't leave.